Good afternoon, Governor.
Good afternoon. It's good to be with you.
Good to be with you. And you've been doing some traveling since we last saw you, in particular the last few days.
We did. We traveled on Sunday evening up to Washington for some meetings on Monday, which had with Lieutenant General Simonite, who is the head of the Corps of Engineers, and we talked about dredging generally in Louisiana, but primarily about the Comeet River Diversion Project and trying to get that funded and completed in the nearest term possible. And we also had meetings with the Department of Transportation to talk about opportunities for infrastructure grants, and making sure that we are well positioned to succeed in those grant applications and some other transportation issues. And then finally, we were able to go to the White House, and I met with Deputy Chief of Staff to talk about various issues related to different things going on in Louisiana, particularly around the recovery of the floods here last year and some of the relief that we need, whether it's duplication of benefits issues that we're having in that program and some other things. And so it was a very productive day, I thought, on Monday, but it's always good to be back here in Louisiana.
And somewhat of a disappointing adventure over the weekend.
Oh, yeah. Well, those travels, I was trying to forget. I was in Starkville on Saturday night when the Tigers ultimately came up short in a lopsided fashion to the Mississippi State Bulldogs, which is especially painful for me because my wife's family are all Mississippi State Bulldog folks. And I was able to make it back on Sunday for the Saints game, which wasn't a whole lot better. And I will tell you, you hear these jokes all the time, but it's true. When LSU and the Saints lose on the same weekend, it is a more difficult state to govern because people are in a sour disposition. But in any event, I look forward for both teams bouncing back and having good years.
Cowbells still ringing in your ears?
Cowbells are definitely still ringing in my ears. That's the first time I'd been to Starkville to a game. I'm not saying I'll never go back, but it's going to be a while.
877-217-5757 for Governor John Bel Edwards. Lorraine in Alexandria. Good afternoon, Lorraine. You're on Ask the Governor.
Yeah, thank you. I want to thank the governor for standing with and for the people of Louisiana and working on a bipartisan effort to protect our health care. This has been so anxiety-filled feeling with the Republican efforts to do anything, it seems, to get a win and take away the security that people have enjoyed under the HCA. And we are having a rally on Sunday at the state capitol at 1 p.m.
Okay. Thank you, Lorraine.
Well, Lorraine, thank you for the call. And I will tell you that I'm concerned, too, about the proposals that have been considered in the United States Congress, the so-called repeal and replace proposals around the Affordable Care Act. And I'm concerned about the one that's currently pending before the Senate. And I don't have any doubt that Louisiana would be one of the states that come out the worst under that particular proposal. And so I think it's time to do something in a bipartisan way. And this issue is so important. It affects so many people. It's such a big part of our economy that it needs to be done in regular order in front of committees that have jurisdiction over health and in a way that allows full opportunity for debate, amendments, input from stakeholders around the country, and then hopefully that process would play out with a bipartisan result. You know, I was able to sign on to a letter just yesterday with a total of 6 governors, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, that are recommending that Congress, particularly the Senate, not move forward with the Graham-Cassidy bill, and that we do things in a bipartisan fashion according to regular order. And I think that would be good for our state and good for our country, quite frankly.
Now, the reports are that well over 400,000 people have taken advantage of the Medicaid expansion since you accepted the money available under the Affordable Care Act. Is that an accurate number?
I can be a little more accurate, 434,594.
Okay.
And those are working poor people who have gained health insurance. And the rate of uninsured when it comes to health insurance in Louisiana fell in a year's time from a little more than 24% to right at 10%. We think it's a little less than 10% because the survey year only had 6 months with the Medicaid expansion. So we think we've reduced the uninsured rate to around 9% from where it was at 24%. But more than that, we're literally saving lives by diagnosing individuals earlier with diseases and starting treatments, whether it's cancers, hypertension, diabetes. We are saving lives. We're also saving money. We're going to save more than $300 million state general fund in the current fiscal year because of Medicaid expansion. And we also have access to health care for those who need substance abuse treatment and mental health treatment to a degree that has never been available before. So we think it's the right thing to do for all of the obvious reasons, and Medicaid expansion has been good for our state, has been great for our state, and the Graham-Cassidy bill would actually end the expansion in 2020.
Rebecca in New Orleans, you're on Ask the Governor with Governor John Bell Edwards. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi, how are you? Hi, Governor. Thank you for doing this every month. I really appreciate it.
Good afternoon, Rebecca.
I am calling because I have some concerns about fiscal responsibility, specifically regarding some Atchafalaya Basin restoration projects and on a broader scale, the Coastal Master Plan. When you stated you approved of the Bayou Bridge pipeline due to your faith in our state agencies, I'm not questioning that, but I do question the Army Corps of Engineers. I have no faith in them since they permitted Enterprise Pipeline with no environmental impact statement, and it's currently being built through an area of the basin where we spent $1 million on restoration.
Well, Rebecca, thank you for calling in. And obviously, this is a topic that arouses a lot of strong passion on both sides of the issue. I do know that as a state, we have to find a way to transport hydrocarbons to where they are needed in our refineries and in our plants. And I believe overall the safest way to do that is in a pipeline. I think it's actually more risk in transporting that material by train or by truck, given accidents. And I believe pipelines can be built if all of the permit requirements and regulations are followed in a way where the spoil is properly handled and you don't interfere with the flow of water and the movement of wildlife and that sort of thing. And so we do favor, as an administration policy, the Bayou Bridge pipeline, but we are going to ensure that it's done properly. And before it's built, it's going to have to meet all of the requirements in law and in regulation, and we will enforce all of the permit requirements as well. And that has not always been done in the past. And I think that is one of the reasons why so many people are concerned about this particular pipeline. But we're going to do what we need to do as administration to make sure that we can engage in commerce using hydrocarbons, but in a way that protects the environment.
Thank you, Rebecca. As far as the budget as a whole, we've gotten accustomed to these mid-year shortfalls. How's it looking right now?
Well, we actually got some good news here in the last couple of days. It appears that we will very quickly announce about $143 million surplus on the revenue side as we closed out last fiscal year on June 30th. That's the first time we've used that word in a long time to describe our current fiscal situation, and that's certainly a positive development. It's very difficult given the cuts that we've made and given the limited amount of revenue that we've had compared to previous years. But we've been disciplined. We've worked extremely hard, and so the revenue is finally exceeding slightly expectations, the forecasts. And the only thing we have left to do is make sure that the expenditures from last year were at or below what was authorized, and I think we're going to have that be the case as well. We'll know that in the next couple of days. And so That's good news for the state. There's only so many things that you can do with surplus, and that's the right approach to take. The Constitution limits it. You can do things like fund the rainy day account. You can fund the unfunded accrued liability with it. You can do capital construction projects. You can defease debt. Those things that make proper use of one-time revenues. And so it's a positive step. It doesn't really help with the cliff next year because that's a state general fund problem that we will incur come June 30th of next year when about $1 billion worth of revenue just falls off the books. But it shows that we are headed in the right direction.
And if it were the other way around, you would be looking at making more cuts.
Yes, and in fact, that's what's happened over the past several years, including last year, where if you carry forward, either expenditures that were higher than they should have been into the next year, or you have a shortage of revenue and you're just unable to pay the bills, that has to be paid first out of the current year collections, and because that's not part of the budget, then you then have a deficit open up immediately when that happens. So that has not happened. Right now, we also do not expect to develop a mid-year deficit in the current fiscal year, which will be the first time in a number of years that has happened as well. So right now, things are stabilized, largely driven by unemployment, which is down to 5.2%, which is the lowest since August of 2008. And so we've got good news on multiple fronts. It certainly isn't mission accomplished. We've got an awful lot of work to do. I'm the first to say that. But in many significant ways, we've got things moving in the right direction.
Let's try James in Longview, Texas. James, good to hear from you again.
It's good to hear you, Jim, and hello, Governor Edwards.
Hi, James.
Anyhow, I'm on the same topic as you just touched on, the budget and everything. I was reading in the news where you recently held another business outreach meeting regarding your hope to close the budget gap. And could you kind of tell me a little bit more about that, how you're trying to merge the so-called stakeholders and see what they can do? I'm just wondering what can they do in your estimation that they haven't already done to avoid that $1 billion budget cliff?
Well, James, thank you for the call. And by the way, our hearts and prayers go out to the folks in Texas and now in Florida and Puerto Rico because of these storms. I will tell you that I'm very proud of the way Louisiana has been a good neighbor to Texas, especially extreme southeast Texas around Port Arthur and Vidor and Orange, with some of the work that our first responders did and the Cajun Navy, just tremendous work. And we ultimately sheltered about 3,000 people from Texas for a number of days before we could get them back into Texas. With respect to your question, I have been going around the state and meeting with local elected officials, but also with businessmen and businesswomen. So I'm trying to hear from as many people who represent all of the different economic sectors here in Louisiana and all the different geographic areas of our state as to what their ideas are about how we address this cliff, which we only have it because $1 billion worth of revenue will fall off the books because it was enacted in a very short-term fashion, and before it fell off the books, the legislature had committed itself to replacing it with a permanent restructuring of our tax and budget system. But they've rejected every single recommendation thus far that came out of the task force they created. So we're not there yet, but I believe we will get there. And I'm having positive meetings with leaders in the legislature, Republican and Democrats alike, with members of the business community, just explaining that we actually have had, over the last 10 years, a reduction in state general fund of $1 billion. So the general fund this year is $1 billion less than it was 10 years ago. And if you take the $9.4 billion in state general fund that we have and you look at what's discretionary, the $1 billion cliff represents right at a third of all discretionary spending. And we know because of the constitutional framework about what's protected and what's not, if you have to make big cuts, you take those cuts out of healthcare and higher ed. That's what we need to avoid. The good news, James, is, and this is great news for the people of Louisiana, we don't really need net new revenue. We just have to replace the temporary revenue with permanent revenue. And we're going to do that, and we're going to set the stage for an era of prosperity like this state has not seen in many decades.
Thank you, James. Let's give Farron another shot. Farron in Baton Rouge, you're on Ask the Governor.
Yes. Hey, thank y'all for having this each month. And I wanted to thank John Bell Edwards for the new laws that are coming into effect, these 200 new laws. I was calling on reference to, and also belated happy birthday.
Well, thank you.
But I also wanted to find out about the LA.gov and the phase for the insured people that had been paying their premiums and not living in their homes, and how the flood insurance had lowballed us, and suggestions about reimbursements and how long will it take for the help to come in for us to get back into our homes after the flood, because of the fact that it's been over a year and we still haven't seen any other assistance beside what the insurance has, estimated our value of our home, and we still have plenty of repairs to go through. And I hear of all people in the same phase as had flood insurance but doesn't have enough money to get back into their homes, and they're having to sell them half flooded and all of that. So I just would like to know how long it's going to take for this phase for the insured to continue to get help on the low vol and flood insurance that was given to us.
Well, Farron, first of all, thank you for the call, and I'm very sorry that you and so many others are going through what you're going through when it comes to this recovery. And as I understand your question, you had flood insurance through the National Flood Insurance Program, but you don't believe that the claim was properly handled, and you and others are getting lowballed on the damage that's being paid pursuant to your policy. And by the way, I hear this very, very often as I travel around the state and go to those areas that were flooded in March and August of 2016. I hear it sometimes on the structure, but most often I hear it on the contents coverage. As you know, and I'm certainly not trying to duck the question, and in fact, I'd like for you to stay on and give Micah your name, and I'm going to have someone from my office to call you to make sure that I fully understand all of the implications of your question, or so that we can better help you. But the National Flood Insurance Program is administered by FEMA. It is not a state program, and the only thing I can tell you is if you're, at the end of the day, unhappy with the treatment that you receive relative to what they paid on your claim, and you can't not get that successfully resolved, then I would have to tell you that you should go see an attorney, because that's the only other means that I'm aware of to actually get additional assistance if you've got a valid claim to be made. But if there were other things that you were asking about, please give your name and number to Micah, and then we will give you a call back, and I'll have someone from my office who's over the Restore program give you a call.
And I think we lost Farron, but if you call back, we will put you in touch with the governor's office. Chuck in Shreveport. Chuck, you're on Ask the Governor.
Well, thank you so much, Governor. We up in Shreveport, we hear radio programs from time to time that some of the Republicans say that you're more interested in raising taxes and there's not any plan to cut spending. Are there any areas in government that you see for Louisiana that could maybe stand a little trimming?
Well, Chuck, first of all, thank you very much for the call. And I would just tell you that our approach to the $2 billion deficit that I inherited was balanced. I've cut over $600 million state general fund expenditures in the 20 months that I've been governor. I have, through the policies that we have pursued, saved the state over $200 million last year. It'll be more than $300 million this year, just on the Medicaid expansion. And so certainly a revenue component is part of a balanced approach to record deficits such as the $2 billion deficit that I inherited. There are always things that we look at to see whether we can become more efficient, where we can save money, and I'm willing to continue to do that. In fact, I've instructed the Commissioner of Administration to examine every possible area of the budget where we can make reductions. But the idea that we can solve this billion-dollar fiscal cliff with a cuts-only approach, I think, is faulty. Those cuts would be so painful that I don't believe you'd ever get 53 votes in the House of Representatives to pass a budget. And so I want to swap out the temporary revenue for a permanent restructuring using tax reform, and I think that's the way to go.
Let's go to Lafayette and Jeff. Jeff, good afternoon. You're on Ask the Governor with Governor John Bell Edwards.
Gentlemen, good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Certainly.
Okay. Governor, I have a question concerning the Vermilion River. As you know, in August of 2016, we had severe flooding over here. Unfortunately, our home was one of many that did flood. We ended up being homeless for about 9 months. Thankfully, we're back in. Now we had Harvey come into southwest Louisiana recently, and I have a feeling, a very strong feeling, that had that storm made landfall 60 or 70 miles further to the east, we may well have flooded again. The Vermilion was forecast to go above flood stage. So my question is this. I know there's been a lot of effort to look at the flooding situation over there in the Baton Rouge area, but what about the Vermilion River here in Acadiana? What is being done to hopefully get the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to dredge that water course, sir?
Well, Jeff, thank you for the call. I'm very sorry that you flooded last year. I am very thankful that Mother Nature spared us this year, because you're exactly right. If you look back at what some of the forecasts were for that hurricane track and what would happen because of both rainfall and storm surge, we largely dodged a big-time bullet. Now, there were still several hundred homes, primarily in the Calcasieu area and in Beauregard Parish, that did flood, and those homeowners certainly don't feel like they dodged a bullet. I can tell you that specifically in Acadiana, all of the parishes and the nine parishes came together and decided they wanted to work on flood control from a different perspective, rather than each parish getting its share, for example, of hazard mitigation grant program dollars and doing flood control work and drainage work in their particular parishes. We put it into one pot, and we are going to study the flood control there on a floodplain basis, and so that all the projects will be properly vetted and will produce a bigger, more substantial impact on flood control. And so all of those parish presidents, including yours, President Joel Robideau, this is a new model for our state. I think it will be effective. With respect to dredging, I was able to speak to General Simonite, who was the head of the Corps of Engineers, at his office in Washington on Monday of this week. We talked about dredging needs, and both for flood control purposes, but also for navigation and commercial purposes. This is a pressing priority in many places in Louisiana, including the Vermilion River. And I am certainly mindful that you do have additional deposits of sediment that come in because of these storms. Now, I was told that 2 or 3 emergency dredging contracts have been let over the last week or so in order to try to get in some areas, and I cannot remember whether the Vermilion River was one of them, but in order to remove some of the sediment that was deposited as a result of Tropical Storm Harvey. So I will try to find out whether the Vermilion River was one of those, but it's certainly something that we need to be paying attention to.
Thank you, Jeff. Suzanne in New Orleans. Hello, Suzanne. You're on with Governor Edwards.
Yes, Governor, thank you so much for your show.
Please turn down your radio, Suzanne. Okay.
Ooh, it's kind of hard. Okay, is this better?
A little better. Let's try it.
Okay. Thank you for your show, and I have a question. How exactly are oil companies free to build pipelines on private property? Basically my question is, how is eminent domain determined, in this case?
Well, I don't know that I would probably have to take a refresher from law school, Suzanne, to give you a proper answer on that. It's not really the oil companies that build the pipelines. There are different companies, they're pipeline companies, some of which are intrastate, some are interstate, and it makes a difference as to how they proceed. But I believe that it's generally acknowledged in the state and in the federal government that pipelines are necessary, and they have to carry goods in commerce, and so there is an expropriation authority there in certain circumstances when the pipelines are approved, and they have to work with the private property owner the same as if we wanted to build a highway across someone's property, or the same as if Entergy wanted to build a structure on someone's property in order to move electricity. Regardless of whether it's the state or a private entity, the expropriation process is largely the same. But I don't have any more information for you on that today. But if you've got a specific question, or if I didn't answer the way that you wanted me to in terms of giving you enough information, please give your name and number to Micah, and we'll try to get back with you with some more information.
I see a line open for the first time in a while for Governor John Bell Edwards, and we have a little while to go this hour, so there is an opportunity to talk with the governor of Louisiana. A couple of items: the tragic death of the fraternity pledge at LSU. Is that something that you've been following?
It is, and President King Alexander and I had a long visit about that last Friday, and I'm in the process of sending a letter to the higher education leaders in our state, each of the system presidents, and I'm going to direct them to get with all of the presidents of the universities and the chancellors of our community and technical colleges and talk about this issue of hazing, but also the overconsumption of alcohol, and both with respect to the Greek life community, the fraternities and sororities, but more generally speaking, across the spectrum of activities and groups that exist on our college campuses, because how tragic is it that this family from Georgia sent their son to LSU, and as a young freshman, when he's supposed to be having the time of his life, he's actually dead, and he's dead from alcohol poisoning, and so we've got to make sure that this doesn't happen again. And I will tell you, Louisiana's moved a long way over the last number of years in instituting policies and practices to guard against this. But it did happen, and so that means that we have to redouble our efforts and make sure that it doesn't happen again. But that is just tragic beyond comprehension. You know, you hear it said often, Jim, parents are not supposed to have to bury their children. And you surely aren't supposed to have to bury your young child because they died on a college campus because of some sort of a hazing ritual or something that's nonsensical is what happened.
And today's front page story in many newspapers in Louisiana is of a 23-year-old young man, a Baton Rouge High graduate, arrested for what appears to be racially motivated shootings in our community.
Tragic and sad, and you often wonder how someone develops that amount of hatred toward their fellow man, and I can't make sense of it. I do know that it has visited tremendous pain on the community as a whole. We have made so much progress in many ways since the Alton Sterling matter and the shooting of 6 police officers last year, 3 of whom were killed. And this isn't going to stop that progress, but you know, I wish I had some way to know who it was that was infected. You know, it's kind of like I think it was Montrell, the Baton Rouge police officer who was killed, and he said, "Don't let hate infect your heart." And I mean, that's a quote that came from him, and it appears that this young man was so misguided, and he allowed that hate to infect his heart, and just extremely tragic. And there's no excuse for it at all. And I hope that people out there, if they see individuals who they believe are capable and inclined towards this type of violence, that they will do something, notify somebody before it actually happens.
Anthony, you're on the air with the governor.
Greetings and salutations, most noble governor. Thank you for all the budget cuts you've made and the way you reinstalled fiscal maturity to our government. I would like to know if the governor can legislate bills. Can you write a bill? It's very obvious that the CEOs of Walmart, Burger King, Dunkin' Donuts make $5,000 an hour, $10,000 an hour, but the average working American is not making enough money to pay the rent. Could you please legislate a bill to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, sir?
Well, Anthony, thank you very much for the call, and I think you know the answer to the question. I can't write the bill as a governor, but I have supported, and we've had legislation introduced to raise the minimum wage, not from $7.25, which is where it has been since 2009, but to $8.50 an hour, and do it over 2 years. And that's the same minimum wage that we have, for example, in our neighboring state of Arkansas. And I think that that's a meaningful modest but meaningful step in the right direction because $7.25 is not adequate compensation for an hour's worth of work in 2017. I also think that we ought to make sure that women are paid the same as men when they do the same job. And right now in Louisiana, on average, it's 66 cents on the dollar. That's the biggest gap in the country. And for women of color, it's as little as 49 cents on the dollar. And so that ought to offend everybody who believes in fairness. And so I support that legislation as well. We've not been successful in moving those bills through the legislative process. So I would tell you it's not the failure to introduce the legislation that prevents these things from happening. It's the failure of the legislature to adopt them into law. We're going to keep working on it because it's the right thing to do. I said I was going to do those things when I was running for governor, and we're not going to give up. And ultimately, we're going to be successful.
Peter in Prairieville. Peter, good afternoon. You're on Ask the Governor.
Governor, I just wanted to tell you that you've done a great job and not to give up. There's a lot of people behind you, and just making up for the last governor is going to be a long haul, but I think you can do it. That's all I wanted to say.
Peter, thank you. It's very kind of you to call in. Look, I am more motivated than ever to serve as governor, and I am more optimistic than ever in our state. We are so much better off today than we were a year ago. I'm going to boldly predict that this time next year we're going to be even better off, and we're about to enter into an era of prosperity here in our state. We have the most foreign direct investment in the country right here in Louisiana, if you look at it on a per capita basis right now. And even if you forget about the per capita basis and just compare Louisiana with all the other states, no matter how big they are, we're number two. That's an example of our ability to attract investment, to create jobs. We just have to do our part, stabilize our state, make sure that we're investing in critical institutions like our higher ed institutions so that we have the pipeline in place for talent, for educated and trained employees. And if we can do that, the future of Louisiana is brighter than it's ever been, and I'm optimistic we're going to get it done. So thank you for the call.
877-217-5757, and let's go to Amy in Arnoville. Hi, Amy. You're on Ask the Governor.
Hi. Good
Hello,
afternoon,
Amy.
Governor.
Hello, Amy. Thank you very much.
My question today regards our state highway system, and I know we are probably looking for several solutions to raising money to keep our highways in good condition. Has any consideration been given to making the bridge over the Atchafalaya Basin a toll bridge?
Well, Amy, consideration hasn't been given to that because the federal law doesn't allow you to place a toll on an existing interstate. And so the only way that you can place a toll is if you replace, for example, a bridge. So we would have to actually replace the bridge over the basin or at least create a new lane, but then you could only toll the usage of that particular lane. That actually happens in other states around the country where they have road networks with the volume of traffic to support tolls. But I can tell you that specifically to answer your question, that has not been considered. One of the things that is under consideration, because we have to think outside the box and take a new approach, is that as we need new capacity in other parts of the state, that we look at tolling as one of the options to finance the construction of these projects, because we have an inadequate flow of revenue in Louisiana as it relates to transportation infrastructure. We have the fourth oldest gas tax in the country. 26 states have increased their gas tax since we have, and it's 30 years old, and it was originally 16 cents. It's still 16 cents, but it's only worth 7.5 cents because of inflation. And Amy, this is one of the challenges we're going to have in a couple of years. Based on the amount of money we're producing for the Transportation Trust Fund because of our gas tax, we're not going to be able to provide all of the non-federal match to draw down our federal Transportation Trust Fund dollars. And we will start leaving some of those dollars in Washington. Well, I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. But that shows you kind of how out of whack we are. But we're going to make some headway on this and make some improvement. But nothing is easy and nothing is free. Santa Claus and the Tooth Fairy are not going to deliver new bridges and new highways for us.
Danny in Baton Rouge. Hi, Danny. You're on with Governor John Bell Edwards.
Hey, Governor.
Hi, Danny.
I spoke with you at Montreal's funeral, and I heard you made a comment about one of his quotes. And I'm going to tell you the same thing I told you then. I think you're doing a wonderful job. And we Christian folks of the world love you, and we're going to pray and ask God to continue to bless you and continue to keep you strong and move it in the right direction. God bless you, and God keep you. That's our prayer.
Danny, thank you so much for the call, and God bless you too.
As we wait for a few more calls, and there are some people on hold, I'm just waiting for the signal to put you on the air. When that happens, we'll do it. But, Governor, it's an uncertain world right now. A lot of people are certainly concerned about what's happened in Mexico. We've had 3 killer hurricanes, potential conflict with North Korea. You're delving into what's happening in the state. That's your job, but are you also looking at what's going on around us?
Well, I am, and I will tell you, Danny just mentioned prayer. I happen to be a Catholic Christian. I believe in the awesome power of prayer, and it's never out of order to pray that things get better. But in addition to prayers of petition, we also need to offer up prayers of thanksgiving too. But these are trying times, uncertain times on an international front because of man-made problems, but also because of Mother Nature and the increasing frequency of severe weather events. The floods, we had a 1,000-year flood here in August of last year. It was a no-name storm. I mean, that's just not supposed to happen. And so we have to be very careful about this, and we have to be smart about how we invest money, how we mitigate against the risk of these things from happening again. And it's going to take all of us working together. I'm very worried about the fact that the National Flood Insurance Program was only reauthorized for 3 months. And what's going to happen after that? I think it'll be reauthorized, but what changes are going to be made? Will the premiums be unaffordable for those folks who live along the coast in Louisiana, for example? I hope not. I know our congressional delegation is working extremely hard to make sure that does not happen.
Rosalind from Shreveport, you'll be our last caller today, and for those we weren't able to get to, the governor will be back next month on October 18th. But Rosalind, you're on the air with the governor.
Hello, Governor. I think you're doing a wonderful job, and thank you for everything that you do for us Louisianians.
Thank you,
My
ma'am.
call is about managed long-term care. I'm a senior citizen, caring for a senior citizen, and I want to know your position on managed long-term care and how we can provide funds for organizations like the Department of Aging and Disability Services that would allow us to keep our loved ones at home rather than having to put them in a nursing home. Thank you for your response.
Rosalind, thank you for calling. And this is a question that comes up quite frequently. One of the real challenges along long-term managed care is a minority of states have actually moved in that direction. I don't have the latest number. I'm thinking it's 19 or 20 states. It may be a few more than that. One of the challenges that you have is when you have a budget problem and you don't have all the revenue that you need, when you seek to place an insurance company between the state and the provider, you've got to make sure that you can do that so that they can meet their administrative costs and turn a profit and still have enough money reaching that provider to provide the services that are necessary. And so that is my biggest concern. I do know that under any circumstances, a transition to long-term managed care will visit more costs on the state because there is some period of time where you're paying for the current system and the new one at the same time. But I appreciate your call, and I share your goal of allowing people to stay in their own homes longer.